bits and pieces we need to make our milestone pouch. I've got all the fabric cut out already, and then I'll talk you through the tools that will be using. Obviously we have a sewing machine with an appropriate needle for whatever fabric you're using, so you could use a denim needle. I tell you, I nearly always use just a universal number 12 needle, and I've not like an 80-12 needle, and I've not had any issues with that making any of my milestone pouches, even with a heavier fabric. But you could consider a denim needle, or if you're using a very dense fabric, a microtex needle as well. But I usually just see how I get on, and if there's a problem I'll change it. But I don't foresee any issues. The fabric I'm using for the main outer is a heavyweight, heavy washed canvas, which is good and sturdy. It's actually probably on the little too sturdy end of it, but I've used a green one before, and it looks really well, so I'm happy with that. For the lining, the main lining and the zip pocket lining, I'm using a lightweight canvas. Similarly, I'm using the same stuff for the drawstring casing. And then for the zipped pocket lining, I'm using, the slip pocket lining, I'm using a Robert Kaufman Big Sur canvas, which is kind of between heavy and lightweight canvas, so kind of a midweight canvas, which I don't think I need to reinforce. I'll use the same for one of the tabs on the pouch, and the same for the snap strip. I'll be using just a little bit of SF101 interfacing to reinforce the snap locations, which I'll cut to size. I always kind of keep little scraps in a little box, and have little squares for reinforcement if I need it there. For my cord to hold my keys, it's just a cotton cord. I think it's like a 2mm or a 3mm. It's called up as it's quite narrow cotton cord. And then for my elastic, I have a 1/4 inch 5mm elastic. So you could use string elastic for that. Probably nothing wider than what I have there for the drawstring. Not drawstring, elasticated casing, I should say. It's not a drawstring, elasticated casing. For punching the holes for my snap fixings, I usually use an awl rather than a hole punch, so that I don't damage the fabric quite as much. I find that really useful. For marking notches, I'll use ironing heat soluble or heat disappearing marker. I've actually cut most of my notches where I meant to already, which I don't usually do. I usually do it the last minute. Scissors, obviously, for cutting fabric. All of my fabric will have been cut out using a rotary cutter, smaller one, the 28mm, which is I think just over an inch blade on it, which is very handy for smaller bits. I have my prim pliers for my snap fixing. I have rulers if I need it, and then I think I'm going to be adding a swivel hook, and I might add another little ring as well. I haven't decided. I'll figure that out as I go along. So I'll probably have to make a little tab for them that I haven't got cut out yet, but I'm going to make that decision at the last minute, because that's how I tend to make things. I'll figure it out. So the zip I'm using is a metal zip. It's a 20cm zip. So I will be, instead of a zipper tape for this one, I'm going to, just because I've made another bag using these same notions on this type of zip, so I just want to match it up. Oh, there's the sun. So yeah, I'll end up sewing over the end of that and cutting it back carefully. We'll see how that goes. Otherwise, a 3mm, or sorry, a number 3. Otherwise, a number 3 tape is perfect. But I'm going to give it a go with the metal zip, just because I like it. Okay, let's get going. Okay, so I have my blue thread in my machine. I've blue in the bobbin as well. I've just used a standard Gutterman Sewall polyester thread. I have my square of interfacing on my main outer. I'll collect my slip pocket lining, and I don't need to put any interfacing on that, because it's sturdy enough, and most of the force for the snap is going to be coming from this side, the right side anyway. So I'll be putting these right side together, and I'll pin them in place, and then sew with a 5mm, so a ½ centimetre seam allowance, which I think is 3/16 of an inch. So I've got my pins. I tend to use pins instead of in place of clips. Generally, I just much prefer the security of them. So first things first, I'll sew that with a ½ centimetre seam allowance. So just take your time going around the curve. Make sure they're right side together. So again, I'm sorry, this is another fabric that is no right side or wrong side, but this is right side and right side facing each other. So if you need to lift the foot each time to kind of, as you're going around the curve, do that. Just take your time, do a couple of stitches and then lift it to adjust. When it's a tight curve like this, it can be hard to do it and keep while keeping the curve, or sewing it in line with the curve. So don't be afraid to lift up your presser foot. And also don't worry if the stitching isn't completely in line with the curve. You're fine. Okay, so it's that. It's a bit wonky there. I might go around that again just to get it a little bit better. Okay, that's a little bit better. So that's a pretty even curve. So now I'm going to press, first of all I'm just going to press this all to one side, and then I'm going to understitch along this curve here. So I'm going to press this all away, and then I'm going to understitch to hold this, to hold the lining in place away from the front face. So I will press it first. Okay, so I've just pressed that over so that when I understitch it'll be a little bit neater. I'm just going to make my stitch length a bit longer to 3 for top stitching, just over 3 I usually do. And again, just go nice and slowly along the curve and all will be well. I usually pick just a little line or a little spot of light on my presser foot and follow that around. So again, don't be afraid to stop to kind of rearrange your fabric, push out any of the little creases that are going to appear there at the start. So because it's a small curve, the fabric kind of puckers a little, but it'll all flatten out when you press it to the other side. You just don't want to sew and trap one of those puckers. Okay, so now I'm just going to press all of that to the inside. Okay. I'm just going to show you what I did. So I understitched the pocket, then I folded the slip pocket piece up in half and stitched down the side with a 1 centimetre seam allowance, making it a little bit less if I needed to get past there, and same on the other side. Okay, I just need to trim back the seam allowance on there a little bit. By half. Okay, so next I'm going to make the zip pocket. So zip and our zip pocket lining. I'm using a 20 centimeter, which I think is about 8-inch closed ended zip. So I'm going to be just sewing across the bottom of that, so it's a bit longer than needed. So I think the tutorial calls up 17 centimeters, which is about 6 3/4 inches, 6 or 7 inches length of zip. Of number 3 zipper tape is perfect. This is a number 3 metal zip, and I'm just going to sew across the end. So first things first is to figure out which is the top or the bottom end of your zip. So this end has the slip pocket on it, and this end will have the elasticated casing. So that's what I consider to be the top. So I'm going to have the zip on this side here. So I'm going to place this, lining it up so that there's a 1 centimeter gap to the end of my, basically I'm allowing for the seam allowance here. So I'll make sure that that is just over 1 centimeter, so I don't sew over the zip end. So that's pretty fine there like that. With the right side of the zip facing the outer fabric, and the right side canvas is the same both sides, but the right side of the canvas lining facing the right side here as well. I've opened the zip fully so that it's not interfering with the sewing of the zip. I'm just going to double check again before I pin it that this is over 1 centimeter. It's just over 1 centimeter. Bring it a touch in. Okay. So quite often I would match my bobbin thread to my lining fabric, but because it's such a small bag, you're not really ever going to see the lining, so I'm not worrying about it. I'm just going to keep the same blue zip. So I'm going to be using a 7 mil, which is, I guess, just over 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, or sorry, just under 3/8 of an inch seam allowance between 3/8 and 3/16. But use whatever comfortable to you. For me, I often use that because I can run it along the side of my zip, one side of this, without having to change to a zipper foot. But you can change now to a zipper foot and sew this with whatever is comfortable for you, but approximately a 7 mil seam allowance. Oh, one thing that I haven't done here that I'm going to do is, when I'm sewing with 2 different weights of fabric and a zip, there's a chance that one of the fabrics that's at the top is going to creep along the zip. So actually the best thing to do is to have your heavier weight fabric at the top, and then it's less likely to be pushed along as you sew it. So in this case, my outer, and usually it'll be your outer, so I usually have the outer facing up towards me. So yeah, I'm happy with that. So I'm going to press all that and then top stitch along there. Okay, so I have pressed all that into place. I'm going to top stitch along there. Okay, that's pretty good. And now I'm going to do the same for the other end. I'm just going to zip up my tape, zip up my zip, trim off all the bits of thread, stray fabric, and I'm just going to make sure, actually I'm going to open it a little bit. Just going to make sure that this is at this point in line correctly here, and pin that, and then I'll work from there down. And open the zipper tape fully now as well. So and I'll be pulling that to there. Okay, so now I'm just going to pin all that together, making sure to keep this end in the correct place. So sew the same seam allowance. Okay, so that is that. So just going to turn it out so that I can press it, and sew it, top stitch it. Okay, so I'm going to top stitch it on there. Okay. So that looks good already. Okay, so this is one of the steps that I think some people find most tricky, is what to sew to what here. So I'm going to show you. First thing I'm going to do is trim off the excess of this. I'm going to get an old non-sewing scissors and just sort of cut across the metal zip. So I've got an old craft scissors and I'm going to cut across here. Okay. And then I'm going to just keep my zipper pull out of the way. So what we're doing next is so I could stitch across here just to secure the actual zipper tape, but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to do all this in one step, which is I'm going to just close this bag here. So it's really to keep the zip pocket bag part of the outer lining, or part of the outer bag, as one thing, because the slip pocket is effectively working as part of the part of the main outer fabric there, and then I want the zip pocket to work as part of the main bag as well, so the lining will be in between the two. So I'm just going to secure the zip pocket lining to the main outer on this side, so that you end up with a bag that is the outer bag, but with two of the pockets already integrated into it. Okay, so I'm going to take the center notch, which is just there, and line it up with the center of the zip and pin that. Okay, and then I'm going to stitch across there, and that's easiest done when the main outer is face down, and I'm going to stitch from inside this side. And it doesn't have to be perfectly neat or go to the full end, just keep it within your 1 centimeter seam allowance. So I'll be sewing it with a 1/2 centimeter or 3/16 inch roughly seam allowance here. And I'm going to be sewing across the teeth here, the metal teeth, so I'm just going to jump over them. I'm going to really carefully sew as far as them. I'm going to hand stitch down. If I get any resistance, I'll jump across. Yeah, it's going fine. But I might just be able to avoid all of the metal teeth. Yeah, past them now. Okay, so I just sewed across there. I hand stitched, I hand cranked the machine across there, so that if I felt it hit the metal, I was gonna just go over it, but actually it just went in between. And then on the other side, I think what I'm going to do is just, it's kind of sitting quite neatly there. So I can see the notch in my, the center notch in my lining fabric. I'm just going to line that up in the middle. And I'm kind of quite happy if it sits like that. Okay, I'm going to line it up in the middle. I'm going to pin that. You know, I might pull it over a little tighter. Okay. So again, I'm just sewing the zipped pocket bag to the main outer. I'm doing it from the wrong side once again. Okay. So you can start a little bit in from the end, and you can always go back. It's just to secure it. It doesn't matter if the stitches run right to the very end, and with a roughly ½ centimetre seam allowance. Okay. So you can see there, I haven't sewn right to the end, but that's fine. It's just to secure it to the outer fabric, so that I don't just get all tangled up. And now I will trim back those bits. Okay, so that's that outer bag ready. Okay, the next thing I'm going to do is make the snap strip for the slip pocket. So I'm just going to press the two sides in to meet at the center. Do that first. Okay, so I'm going to do a square-ended snap strip. So what I'll be doing is folding this in half and top stitching up and around, and then fixing a snap fixing there. I think I will add a bit of interfacing to it, because the canvas here is quite tough, but it's not super dense, so I think a bit of interfacing would be no harm. Okay, so the snap strip pattern pieces here has 2 notch positions, so I'll use them to just give me an idea of where to place my interfacing. Just put it like that, and then I'll mark the center and center. So I'll put 2 squares of interfacing on there. I'll trim them down a bit now to fit. So one there, so I'll just trim them back a little bit. It would probably be fine without it, to be honest, I think, but there is nothing worse than having a lovely bag made or a lovely little milestone pouch made and your snap fixing pulling out of it. So I can just about see my notch marks, they've faded a little. So I'm going to press them into place now. Okay, so they're pressed into place, and I'm going to press them back again. Okay, so now I'm just going to press that in half. So if you wanted to, you could push these corners in to make a pointy one, but this fabric is, in fairness, it's thick enough, so I think that'll be too bulky. I'm just going to keep it flat. Okay. So what can be a little tricky is just holding these in place perfectly in line with each other. Let's just do our best. Okay, now pivot. Okay, it's not too bad. I'm actually going to make the end tab, zipper tab here first. So I'm going to fold in half and sew that 1/2 centimeter seam allowance, so 3/16 inch seam allowance. I'm going to press that open, just finger press for now, and turn it the right way out. So that was placed right sides together when I sewed it. And now I'm going to, you can hear my dog there. So now I'm going to press that way. Okay, so that's the zipper tab. I'm just going to stitch at the ends to secure the ends, because it can be quite difficult to make those ends stay straight and in line with each other. So if you just do a few tacking stitches on that end, so that when you sew it into the bag, the pouch, then it stays in place. So again, make them parallel. Okay. Okay, so that's that, and that's going to go there. Now I've got a lot of layers going on here in quite thick fabric, so I'm not convinced I should add any more tabs here. So what I'm going to do is add my swivel hook using some cotton cord instead. Same stuff that I'm going to use for my key cord on the inside. So I'm going to pass that through there. So take this away, pass that through there, and I'm going to line up the cord in there and stitch along. I'll just use a bit of a shorter length rather than wasting all of that. Yeah. So there'll be a 1 centimeter seam allowance there. So that'll be trimmed off about that far. I might make it a tiny bit longer. That. Okay, so I'm just going to, I've got that same issue that I have metal tooth zip, but I think if I'm careful I can do it. I like to keep it tight against the zip, or tight, actually that's what I'll do, I'll keep it tight against the edge of the edge. So instead of hugging the zipper teeth, I'm going to hug the edge of the fabric with this, and then I can sew across it a couple of times. Now back stitch. I'm going to make my stitch length much shorter because I want to actually stitch into the cotton cord to make sure it really is secured. Yeah. Just do that back and forth a few times to make sure it's nicely secured. But you know what I've done? I've sewn right through the main fabric. Oh, stupid me. Okay. So, oh, I just got away with it. Okay, I really got away with that there. So I need to make sure that's pushed out of the way for the other side. Okay, so when that's folded in, this is all the wrong side, that'll be like that. Okay. So depending on what cord you use, you might want to sew or stitch a knot in there, or sorry, tie a knot in there. But I think it's, by the time it's secured across here, I think with all that it'll be plenty secure. So next up, I'm going to add this tab, and on top of that, this is all getting a little bit thick, so hopefully it all works out. I'm going to have the zipper tab, oh sorry, the snap tab. So let's see how this goes. What I just want to do is make sure that this tab is centered on, I'm not worried about what my notches are saying, or it's more just make sure by eye that is centered, because it'll look its best when it's centered. This is of course a great spot to add a label. I'm not going to do that today because I have enough fabric to be dealing with. So I'm going to hold it in place with my fingers and turn it the other way around, making sure it's not shifting. And again, I'm just going to tack it loosely, minding my zipper teeth. So I'm going to hand crank over the area of the zipper teeth to make sure I don't break a needle. So that's that. So I have a lot of fabric here, but I might suggest that you use a lighter weight fabric than I'm using if you don't have a more heavy duty machine. There's a lot of layers there, isn't there? So again, I'm centering that. And I will tack it in place. Okay. Now, so those are all my tabs in place. I'm going to turn it right side out and sew across here. Just push down so I can just about see my notch. So I'm going to line up my notch, but what I'm really going to try my best to make sure is that, and this can be tricky, is that the curve ends here are as even as I can get them, because that's actually going to be more noticeable if they're off than whether or not my center notches are lined up. So if you see there and see there, they look pretty even. So I'm gonna, this is a place where a clip actually might be handy, but I'm pretty sure this isn't going to move too much. And we're just going to have to see how all that bulk works out, because I might have bitten off more than I could chew here. So I'm going to sew from this side, minding my zipper tape. One side I'm going to seam allowance, and I'm going to be very careful in the area of my my zip. Okay, now I'm going to hand crank. So I'm going to show you what's probably happened. I've probably missed a stitch here, where I had to jump across the hand cranking. So I'm going to turn it out and see what it looks like. But if it looks like the stitching is kind of pulling apart, I'm going to add another layer of stitches right behind there at the thickest part to help pull it all together. So those corners aren't very neat right now. can see that if you look, I don't know if you'll be able to see that in the camera, but if you look carefully in there, you can see a few extra stitches that were kind of the thread. So I'm gonna, I am going to do what I said. I'm gonna turn it back the other way and just sew across that area there, with the very close to the original line of stitching. I am going to sew across there with another line of stitching. Really close. Literally about 1 millimetre, or just the tiniest fraction of a bit of an inch. I'm going to hand crank again in the area of my zip. So I guess my advice would be not to use quite such stiff fabric for everything. So yeah, you'll see I've just sewn just inside it, or just within the seam allowance. So I'm going to kind of push that corner out first, okay, as best I can, without turning the whole bag out. Just doesn't have to be perfect. And then I'm going to try and do the other side of the corner. I'm going to push out that corner. So having held it in place even a little bit really helps getting it neat. Not too bad. Okay. So I've got my snap fixings and my awl that I'm going to use to poke the hole. And so this is going to sit here somewhere. Just want to make sure it's centered. There. I'm going to mark it by pushing it in hard. And I can just about see there. Okay. So obviously don't want to damage the bag behind. So I need to make that a bit bigger. So I prefer to use an awl because it breaks less threads in the fabric. Can push it out of shape a tiny bit, but I think it's fine. It's a nice big hole, and most of the threads are pushed out of the way rather than cut. So push that in place, and now okay. Just give it one more push. There we are. So now I'm going to use that to mark where I want the snap. There. So I can see the dot there. I'll just make sure it's centered. Push it out. So that'll go there. That'll go there. I just have to change my okay, so that looks good to me. Okay. I like to do it from the other side as well if I can, because it kind of squashes the metal evenly. It's pretty good. Perfect. Feels good and secure. So that's that end done. Great. So next I'll be adding the elasticated casing and the lining. But so far, so good. Got my lining and my drawstring casing. So maybe I'll sew up my drawstring casing first. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to press that in by 1/2 centimetre and 1/2 centimetre, and on both ends. So I've double pressed that in on either end, and for the outside I'll top stitch because I've got brown on the underside. This is the cotton cord I'm using. I had already cut it and then I decided to add that. So same as that, about 30 centimetres. That's a little bit too much, but it makes it a lot easier to work with when you've got a bit of excess cord to use. So I'm going to position it about 2 centimetres from the end here. There is a notch on the pattern piece, of course. Okay, so I'm going to tack that in place across here. Go back and forth over it a few times, making sure I'm catching the cord in the stitching. And that is that's added, and I can add my key ring onto that. So now what I'm going to make sure is that my lining matches the width of my outer. So which means I need to sew it with a seam allowance that works, which could be 1 centimetre, it could be 1.5 centimetres, or it could be 1/2 centimetre. We'll see. So just line them up on top of each other or side by side. Just make sure, zip that out of the way. Just make sure they are roughly the same, and that even if the the main bag lining is a tiny bit smaller. So we're just about there, which is, when I mark it properly, another one here. Okay. So this is worked out just over 1 centimetre seam allowance. I'm just going to make sure that center is perpendicular when I'm sewing over it. Okay, and I'm not going to sew along the bottom. I'm going to press that open. Finger press, then go over and press the machine. Okay, so press that open. And now we're ready to pin it all together. So I'll turn this yoke, which is really stiff, the wrong way out again. The wrong side out. Pull my zipper down so that it doesn't interfere with the sewing. So the first thing I'm going to have is the drawstring casing, the elastic casing. Sorry, force of habit. and I want that to be the same width. Okay, and I'm going to attach that with the overlap at the back, roughly centered. So do you see what I did there? Sorry. So I have one set inside the other, overlapping. And then center them on that, center them on the notch, pin in place on this side. And now I'll line up the other side. So that's perfect. Pin that in place. Okay. And next I'll have my lining bag right side out. And this is the top end that has the cord on it. And I'm going to place that inside, and I will line up it doesn't really matter which side, it's all going to be inside the bag, so it doesn't really matter. I'm going to line this up with the zipper tape side, I think. Make sure the cord is pressed down into the bag and out of the way. Take that and line it up at the center there. So this will all be very hidden, this joint on the end of the lining, because it's inside the elasticated casing. So I'm not going to stress out about it. Okay, and I'm going to pin that in as well. Stitch in around here and hope that we don't have too much or any puckering. So let's start here. So I'm sewing with, again, a 1 centimeter seam allowance. I'll just keep shifting it as I go along and making sure everything's lining up. So this is tricky, no doubt about it, because it's very small pieces, a very small bag. But just take your time and you'll be grand. Okay, let's see what that looks like. So I've sewn around the whole perimeter. I've not overlapped there very well, so I'm going to go back on that. The rest of it is not bad, so I just need to see, I didn't stay at 1 centimeter, so I'm going to come back and just join them up. So that looks a bit better. So it's not particularly tidy looking here, is it? But it should be fine. So let's turn it right side out and see what happens. So I'm going to close up my lining. I'm going to close up my lining first now in a second, before I add my casing, my elastic to the casing, because it'll be obviously a lot harder to sew it up after. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over and press this into a 1 centimeter seam allowance, which I probably should have done earlier, which is I probably tell you to do earlier in the tutorial. And make sure it's flatten out. press that and then stitch across. Usually I'd hand stitch something, but you're never going to see this on the inside. You know, you're not looking into this bag at all. So that's neatly pressed, and now I'm just going to top stitch along it. Press that in. So you want to make sure that your lining bag is between the slip pocket. That's sitting straight and flat. Now I just need to add key ring to that and the elastic to that. So I have my piece of elastic, which is it's about 5mm or 1/4 inch elastic roughly. 5mm is 3/16, so that's just under 1/4 inch of it, roughly 1/4 inch elastic. I'm going to feed it through using the aid of a safety pin. Okay, so you should just be able to grab the that. Yeah. Now, okay, so I'm going to show you how tight I pull this. It's quite tight because I wanted to secure my key ring so it's just able to come out. So I've seen quite a few made where they're not pulled very tight, and each to their own, but I want it quite tight so that I can just about pull it open to get my key out. I don't want it falling out. So I think about that much. And then I will, it's still good and stretchy. I'll still be able to stretch that to get it out. And I'm gonna stitch across there. So what I tend to do is I put a couple of stitches on one side just to hold it. And then so I'm just going to take it from side to side. Now, I think that's pretty secure. Trim it off. Trim them back. And now just, yep, make sure they overlap again. And that's it. I'm going to add a key ring to that. So I have a key ring which I can